What's going on, everybody? So I have an article here from Blizzard that just dropped about 2 hours ago, highlighting some of the changes that they made from the beta. This is huge changes. I've kind of skimmed through it, but I wanted to react live to most of it and give you guys my opinion. So first off, they've made a variety of fixes and updates to various systems in Diablo 4, all of which will be present in the version of the game that launches on June 6th. This is based on the betas of March 17th and 24th, which is the early access and the open beta for those of you that played it. First thing is dungeon layouts. People were annoyed about backtracking. I would say that, in my opinion, the biggest critique of the dungeon repetitiveness was that there was backtracking. I don't really mind if it's the same layout. I don't really mind if you have to do the same activity. It's really no different from an Greater Rifts or D2 or Path of Exile. Any ARPG kind of is this way. However, the backtracking is something that is a little bit more unfun, and I think that's the most important thing to address, and it looks like that they are doing so. Their note here says their primary goal with the layout changes was to reduce certain kinds of backtracking, which detract from a player's experience. An example of this change is that previously players needed to enter side rooms, causing them to retread the same path. Now many of our structure objectives have been repositioned along main dungeon pathways. Very nice. This is going to make it much more enjoyable, much more fun, in my opinion. Then we have dungeon events. There's a chance for an event to spawn inside of a dungeon and has increased from 10% to 60%. I imagine these dungeon events include things like the Butcher, which is actually really cool. I'm not quite sure if this applies to cursed shrines and cursed wells, but it's possible. Dungeon gameplay. So it looks like they've fixed the dungeon layouts and they're going to address the dungeon gameplay. So reducing the backtrack, small numbers of straggling monsters will seek out the player to help completely kill all monsters objective. I think this is actually a really good change. I think they could have easily made it so that you don't have to kill all monsters and make it like a 95%er, but I think this is a good change. When Animus is gathered, the player and nearby allies will gain 10 resource and reduce all active cooldowns. Cool, that makes Animus dungeons a lot easier and probably one of the better ones to farm, and it already was. Depositing Animus channel time was reduced from 3 to 0 seconds. This is another critique of annoying dungeons. Why do we have to channel in the dungeon when we don't have to mine, or channel when we mine? The time to rescue was reduced from 3 to 1.5 seconds. All rescue objectives now drop a health potion. While carrying Ancient Statue, Bloodstone, Mechanical Box, you're going to grant a 25% move speed increase to you and nearby allies. So it looks like you're going to be able to cruise through the dungeon easier. This, combined with the dungeon layout change, will probably make the dungeons extremely fast comparatively to what it was before. Pedestals have their channel time reduced to 0 seconds. Returning a portal object to its pedestal now fully restores all these different things, resets cooldowns, etc. All doors will now generate a minimap ping when they are opened, and all structure objectives in dungeons now have additional combat mechanics players must overcome. This seems like all good things, all of it. I see no downside to any of these things. For those of you that are complaining about dungeons, I think these are all things that people mention, and I really don't see the big issues with dungeons now. Really don't. Honestly, maybe there's something here that I'm not thinking about, but I honestly think they addressed most of the complaints that a lot of people had. So really good stuff. Lots of changes towards classes here, lots more to go over. So first off, general changes. Effects like stun and freeze can be applied to elite monsters twice as long before they became unstoppable. Review class skills to confirm that all classes have access to sufficient skills that remove control and pairing effects. So little CC breaks. This is a pretty important one. Many legendary powers have updates to their effectiveness. Probably some nerfs to the barb, I imagine, and potentially some buffs to druid. Barbarian, a flat 10% passive damage reduction has been added to the Barbarian class. Okay. Some skill tree passives have their damage reduction effects reduced to compensate. Okay, that's actually a big buff to the barb. I think this is actually a good way to handle it. Although I'm a little worried about the endgame barb because I still think it could potentially be way strong. Whirlwind skill now deals more damage and consumes more fury. I think this is awkward because oftentimes the thing that felt bad about the whirlwind skill is that it did reduce your fury very quickly. Double swing skill enhancement refunds its full fury cost when used on stunned or knocked down enemies. This gives a use case for double swing. I think that oftentimes it was kind of awkward to use unless you're running some sort of berserking build, so I like that. Druid companion skills now deal heavily increased damage. Ultimate skills have their cooldown reduced. Usability improvements made to maul and pulverize. Using a non-shape shifting skill will transform a druid back into their human form. So this is actually a big one. Companion skills, that means things like the wolves, the ravens, and the vine creeper going to be way more damage. I think the wolves were already pretty good. Same with the vine creeper and the ravens, honestly. The ultimate skills were a little bit lackluster, so I like the fact that they're reducing the cooldowns. And then the maul and pulverize definitely needed a buff. I'm not quite sure if this will fix the leveling experience, but I do think that this will help quite a bit. Let's see what they've done with the necromancer here. Summon minions will die more often. Okay, this is a big one, because when you were playing a necro, you had an invincible army at the beginning of the game. Many bonuses in the Book of the Dead have had their stats reduced. Damage dealt by corpse explosion has been reduced. This is a big one because oftentimes I ran builds which basically didn't require any basic ability. You could run corpse explosion that generated essence, then you could run bone spear, and then just nuke everything, or you could just run like the nasty blood mist build, such a good skill. The brightness of skeletal warriors and mages has been reduced. This is a big complaint. I honestly could not care less, but I know some people that were, DTU fans, or even people that really like the atmosphere. I do think that, to be fair to the critique, I do think that it was a little out of place in the Diablo 2 or Diablo 4 atmosphere. And so I think that reducing the kind of, I guess you say, arcade style of the skeletals is a good thing. Rogue upgrades for subterfuge skills have had their bonuses increased. Okay, so shadow subterfuge skills, that's not the shadow, that's the imbuement skills. I think these are the concealment, things like that. Multiple passive skills have had their bonuses increased. This is a big one because a lot of passives don't make sense in a lot of skill trees. And imbuement skills have had their cooldowns increased. So a little bit of a nerf. I think overall it's probably going to be a nerf for the rogue because the imbuement skills were pretty strong. Sorcerer, charged bolts damage was increased and the mana cost to cast has been decreased. Okay, this is a big one because charged bolt wasn't really used all that much. Arc Lash was the preferred one. Decreased the damage of chain lightning and reduced its effectiveness against bosses. I think that a lot of people were complaining that the sorcerer was a little bit too strong. And I would say that honestly, I didn't really see a big problem with it, especially considering the beta. We didn't even see the end game. I don't really think nerfs were necessary, to be honest, but I do think buffs were necessary. And I'm glad they buffed the bard, but I'm not really sure I agree with nerfing the sorcerer so far. Decrease the cooldown for the incinerate skills enchantment bonus. Okay. Firewalls will now spawn underneath enemies more frequently when using the enchantment bonus. I did use this, and I do think that that was a good change. Increase the lucky hit chance for the meteor skills enchantment bonus. Nice. The note here says that whenever we introduced class changes, it is with the goal of making them both and their skills feel impactful and powerful. Some players have adeptly noticed that certain skills are too powerful, and some skills were obviously pretty mediocre. Necromancer's change and the minions was a pretty big one, and I think that is a pretty notable one for the early game. I do think that in the early game, these things probably needed to be balanced. But again, I'm a big proponent of nerf or buffing over nerfing in this scenario. I'm usually that case, but I think there's a time and place for nerfs. I just don't think that we were in that situation. We didn't even really, a lot of this is direct feedback from the beta. As they said, they're basing it off the March 17th and 24th beta. I think that we literally are level 25. We didn't really have the full literary aspects available. We didn't have full skill trees built out. I don't know about nerfing things. I feel like that was probably a premature, but it also depends on how much they nerfed it. I do, however, you can definitely note when things need a buff, because usually the leveling process should be relatively easy, right? Especially when you're considering the base difficulty. And I do think that the Druid and Barb did need a little bit help with the early leveling process. UI, so they fixed some issues here. I'm not too worried about the fixing in the issues. I think that that's kind of standard. A chat will now display on the left side of the screen. Its character stats will be displayed by default. Ooh, that's a big one. Instead, we had plants displaying the first time instead of stats. I think that was a pretty weird idea. The move interact inputs can now be mapped to one button, while the primary attack input is mapped to a secondary button. This is big. This is big. This is something that people really, really wanted. No WASD, but I think this is a really, really big change for people that wanted the primary attack input is mapping to another button, or a secondary button is a pretty big change for some people. And they changed the font. Okay. I'm not quite sure if that matters. I know some people hated it, but it is what it is. On top of that, we've had fixed multiple issues that allowed bosses like the Butcher to become unresponsive. Butcher has been reevaluated for difficulty and will present a greater challenge for later difficulties. I think this is a really, really good. Chort, Malnuk, and Vaynard and others were reevaluated for melee character difficulty, resulting in changes to attacks and fight mechanics. This is, in my opinion, the biggest thing that was a really bad thing for the Barbarian and Druid, was that the melee mechanics were so bad. Things like, for example, there was I don't remember if this is Vaynard, but there was a boss in the campaign or the storyline. There was like the second boss you fight that some of these little red orbs. And what would happen is you could not hit the red orbs, and you also did not want to hit the line between them. The problem is if you were melee, you were battling, and then they would spawn on top of you and you would instantly get hit. Whereas if you're ranged, you would have time to avoid it. Things like that made it so that I felt like it was terrible for melee mechanics. Cellars increase the chance for a dungeon event to occur in cellars. Cellars now consistently reward a chest upon completion. This is a big one because I felt like cellars were literally useless. There was like no reason to do cellars, so I think that's a pretty good one. General quality of life issue where players can increase attacks via move canceling. Reset dungeon button has been disabled. Interesting. And I'm going to put this in here even though they didn't say it. They're adding a gem tab so far as I understand. All right, and we're going to have a full developer live stream on April 20th, so that's going to be pretty excited. Wow, lots of changes, guys. I think overall, what we got here is a massive response to feedback. In particular, the dungeon things, I think they're the most important. I'm really not fussed about the class balancing. I don't really feel like class balancing was a big ticket to punch. Besides, I guess, buffing the Druid and Barb. I think those are two kind of important ones because the leveling experience was poor. I don't really think it was necessary to nerf things yet, just because, I mean, we haven't even, as I said, entered sort of the mid-game. And I think that was kind of a premature thing. However, I'm really excited. I think they did a really good job here so far. And this changes a lot of opinions. This is huge news, to be honest. So very excited about this. Let me know what your feedback is in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all for a video soon.